The kingdom of Ilizania was a place of vast beauty, with skies that shimmered like liquid silver and towering cities that seemed to touch the stars. The Ilizanians were known for their power, wisdom, and longevity. They had ruled over countless planets and species for centuries, their influence felt across galaxies. At the heart of this kingdom was Princess Jara, the youngest of the royal family. She was known for her grace, her beauty, and above all, her arrogance. To her, being born into royalty meant that she was superior to everyone around her, and that included the humans of Earth, who she considered weak and primitive. Jara had been trained in the arts of combat, diplomacy, and leadership from a young age, and she had mastered them all. Yet, for all her training, she had never truly understood the meaning of humility. Her world was one of privilege, where every need was met and every desire was fulfilled. She had never been challenged, never been forced to question her own beliefs or assumptions. That was until she was sent to Earth on a diplomatic mission, a mission that would change everything. The mission was straightforward enough: to meet with the human leaders and discuss a potential alliance between the Ilizanians and Earth. The alliance would benefit both sides, ensuring the safety of their respective civilizations in the face of growing threats in the galaxy. Jara was expected to represent her people with dignity, charm, and wisdom, but what she didn't expect was the human warrior Jerk. Jerk was unlike anyone Jara had ever encountered. He was a human, yes, but there was something different about him. He wasn't like the weak, fragile humans she had seen before. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a powerful build that spoke of a life lived in constant struggle. His face was weathered, hardened by years of battle and survival. His eyes, however, were the most striking feature. They were dark, filled with an intensity that Jara couldn't quite place. There was a quiet strength in them, an unspoken power that seemed to emanate from him, making Jara uneasy. When they first met, Jara regarded Jerk with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. To her, he was just another human, no more important than the others she had met during her travels. But something about him stood out. He wasn't intimidated by her royal status, nor did he seem to care much for the grandeur of her presence. He treated her as though she were just another person, a concept that was foreign to Jara. As the days passed, Jara found herself growing increasingly irritated with Jerk. He didn't bow to her, didn't praise her as others did. He simply treated her as an equal, something that Jara couldn't quite understand. She tried to engage with him, to show off her superior knowledge of combat techniques and leadership, but he remained unfazed, offering only quiet responses and occasional words of respect. His presence was like a quiet storm, and Jara couldn't escape its pull. One day, during a training session, Jara's frustration reached its peak. She had asked Jerk to demonstrate his combat skills, thinking it would be a chance for her to show off her own prowess. The session was held in a grand training hall, a place where the finest warriors of both the Ilizanian and human militaries trained. Jara had been trained in the ancient arts of Ilizanian combat, techniques passed down through generations. She was fast, precise, and deadly. She had never met anyone who could match her, but Jerk was different. The moment the training session began, Jara could see that he was no ordinary human. He moved with a fluidity and speed that took her by surprise. His strikes were powerful but calculated, never wasted. He didn't rely on brute force like the Ilizanian warriors did. Instead, he used his environment to his advantage, using the hall's walls and floors to maneuver in ways Jara had never seen before. His movements were precise, almost surgical in their execution. Jara found herself struggling to keep up. For the first time in her life, she was outmatched. The realization hit her like a thunderbolt, and she didn't know how to react. Her pride flared, and she became more aggressive, trying to overpower him with speed and force. But no matter how hard she tried, Jerk remained calm and composed, always one step ahead. Finally, after what felt like hours, Jara faltered. She missed a step, and in that brief moment of vulnerability, Jerk took advantage. With a swift movement, he disarmed her, sending her sword clattering to the floor. Jara stood there, breathing heavily, her heart racing. She had never been defeated like this before, and it stung. Jerk didn't gloat. He simply offered her a hand, helping her up with a respectful nod. "You fought well, princess," he said in his deep, gravelly voice. "But remember, strength isn't just about power. It's about knowing when to strike and when to hold back." Jara stared at him, her pride wounded. She couldn't understand how a human, someone she had once considered inferior, could best her so easily. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her sword, trying to maintain her composure. She couldn't let him see her weakness. As the days went on, Jara found herself thinking about Jerk more and more. She hated how he made her feel, vulnerable, uncertain, out of control. She couldn't stand it. So she distanced herself from him, trying to bury the feelings of confusion and frustration that had begun to surface. But every time she saw him, every time he spoke to her with that calm, unwavering confidence, she was reminded of how much she still had to learn. It wasn't just his combat skills that bothered her, it was his demeanor. He was quiet, reserved, yet there was an air of authority about him that Jara couldn't ignore. He didn't need to flaunt his strength or boast about his accomplishments. He simply existed with an undeniable presence, something that Jara had never encountered before. And then, one evening, as they were both walking through the grand gardens of the palace, Jara found herself speaking to him more freely. Perhaps it was the isolation of the moment, or the gentle moonlight that bathed the garden in a serene glow. But for the first time she let down her guard. "I don't understand you," Jara said, her voice tinged with frustration. "Why are you so calm, so unmoved?" "I am a princess of Ilizania. I should be the one who commands respect." Jerk looked at her, his expression soft but firm. "Respect isn't something that can be demanded, princess. It's earned through actions, not titles." Jara's eyes narrowed. "You think I haven't earned my place?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "I think," Jerk said, his voice steady, "that you have a lot to learn. You may be strong, but strength isn't everything. Sometimes it's about knowing when to fight and when to listen." Jara stood there, staring at him in silence. His words cut deeper than any sword ever could. She didn't know how to respond. Her entire life had been defined by her status, her superiority over others. And now, here was a human telling her that strength alone was not enough. For the first time, Jara began to question everything she had known. Could it be true? Could she have been wrong all along? Jara couldn't get Jerk's words out of her mind. For days, they echoed in her head, rattling around her thoughts like a prisoner trying to escape. She had always been so sure of her place in the universe, confident that her lineage, her power, and her royal status made her untouchable. But Jerk's quiet strength had shattered that certainty. And now, Jara was left in a strange, uncomfortable silence with herself, unsure of who she was or what she had been taught to believe. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a soft silver glow over the royal gardens as Jara wandered aimlessly, her thoughts a tangled mess. She had always believed that the Ilizanians were the greatest beings in the galaxy, untouchable and perfect in every way. But Jerk had shown her something she hadn't even known existed: humility, strength without arrogance, and a quiet dignity that was foreign to everything she had been raised to value. She had tried to push those thoughts away, focusing on her mission and the duties of her royal position, but it was impossible. The more she thought about Jerk, the more she realized just how little she knew about the human race. There was more to them than their simple technology, their fragile bodies, and their primitive ways. Humans had something that the Ilizanians didn't: heart. They fought for each other, they loved fiercely, and they survived against all odds. Jara's mind wandered back to the day she had first met Jerk. The way he had stood tall, unmoved by her royal presence, the way he had treated her like an equal, not an untouchable princess. It had angered her at first, but now, in the quiet of the night, she couldn't help but admire him for it. He wasn't impressed by her beauty, her title, or her powers. He had seen through all of it. He had seen her for who she truly was, and it had rattled her in a way she couldn't explain. As she stood in the moonlight, contemplating her feelings, a voice broke the silence. "Princess, you should not be wandering the gardens alone at this hour." Jara turned quickly, startled. It was her mother, Queen Zara, walking toward her with a look of concern on her face. The queen's regal presence was impossible to ignore. She was tall, with long, flowing silver hair that shimmered like the stars themselves. Her eyes were sharp, a reflection of the wisdom and power she had accumulated over centuries of rule. Jara had always admired her mother, but lately, the queen's presence had started to feel like a weight, a reminder of everything she was expected to live up to. "I am fine, mother," Jara replied, trying to hide the turmoil in her voice. "Just needed some time to think." Zara raised an eyebrow, a knowing look crossing her face. "About Jerk, I assume." Jara stiffened, her heart racing. "What do you know of him?" The queen's expression softened, and she stepped closer to her daughter. "I know you, Jara. I see how you struggle with him, and I see how you admire him, even though you would never admit it." Jara felt a pang of frustration rise within her. "I do not admire him, mother. He is a human, a mere warrior." Zara's eyes narrowed. "Do you truly believe that?" Jara hesitated. She wanted to argue, to deny it, but the truth was that she couldn't. Jerk had shown her something that had shaken her deeply, and she couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. "No," she admitted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "He is more than I thought, more than I could have ever imagined." Zara nodded, as if she had known this moment was coming. "I thought as much." Jara looked at her mother, confused. "What do you mean?" The queen took a deep breath, her eyes reflecting both pain and wisdom. "There is something I must tell you, Jara, something you have never known." Jara frowned. "What do you mean? What is it?" Zara's gaze softened, and she placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Jerk is not just a warrior, Jara, he is your father." Jara's heart skipped a beat. Her mind went blank, and for a moment she couldn't comprehend what her mother was saying. "What do you mean, my father?" she stammered. Zara closed her eyes, taking a deep breath before continuing. "Many years ago, before you were born, I met Jerk during a time of great need. The Ilizanians were at war with a rival faction, and Earth was our only ally. Jerk was the leader of his people's military forces, a man of great courage and strength. He was unlike any human I had ever met. I fell in love with him." Jara's mind was reeling. Her mother, the powerful queen who had always seemed so untouchable, had fallen in love with a human. It didn't make sense. But why didn't you tell me?" Jara asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. Zara's eyes filled with sorrow. "I couldn't, Jara. The political climate was volatile at the time. The Ilizanians would never have accepted such a union, and we needed to maintain our alliance with Earth. So I kept the truth hidden. I raised you alone as a Ilizanian princess, because that is how the world needed to see you." Jara was stunned. She felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under her. Her entire life, everything she had known, had been a lie. The strength, the pride, the superiority she had been taught to embrace, it all seemed meaningless now. If Jerk, a human, was her father, then who was she really? "But why?" Jara whispered. "Why did you never tell me? Why did you keep this from me?" Zara looked at her daughter, her expression pained. "Because I was afraid, Jara. I was afraid of what you would think, of how it would affect you. I wanted you to be strong, to be everything the Ilizanians expect of you. But now I see that you have been living in the shadow of a lie, and I cannot hide the truth from you any longer." Jara felt a rush of emotions, anger, confusion, betrayal, flood her senses. She wanted to lash out, to scream at her mother for keeping this from her. But deep down, she understood. The weight of her mother's decision had been too much to bear alone. Jara's mind raced with questions. How could she reconcile the woman she had known as her mother with the secret she had just uncovered? How could she embrace a father she had never met, a man she had once seen as nothing more than a primitive human? "I need time," Jara said softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I need to think," Zara nodded. "Take all the time you need, my daughter. But remember, you are not alone in this. You are not just the princess of Ilizania. You are also the daughter of Jerk, and that is a part of you that can never be erased." Jara turned away, her mind in turmoil. She had spent her whole life believing that she was destined for greatness, that her bloodline made her something special. But now everything had changed. She was no longer just a Ilizanian princess. She was the child of a human warrior, a man who had never been part of her world, who had never even known she existed. As she walked through the palace halls, Jara's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She had been raised to believe in the superiority of the Ilizanians, to see humans as beneath her. But now, the line between them was blurred. She had never imagined that she could share something with a human, let alone be the daughter of one. The realization was overwhelming, and Jara wasn't sure how to move forward. But one thing was clear: everything she had known was no longer enough. She would have to forge her own path, one where she could reconcile both sides of her heritage. It wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to find her place in this vast, complex universe. The days that followed Jara's revelation felt like a blur. She had spent countless hours in the royal palace, her thoughts churning as she tried to come to terms with the truth about her father. Everything she had believed about herself, her family, and her world had been shattered. She no longer knew who she was. The certainty that had once guided her every step had disappeared, replaced by an overwhelming sense of confusion. Her mother, Queen Zara, had given her the space she needed, though it was clear that the queen was not entirely at peace with her own decisions. Jara could sense the sadness in her mother's eyes whenever they spoke, the weight of the secret she had kept for so long heavy on both of them. Jara had always prided herself on her strength, her ability to face challenges head-on, but this was different. This wasn't a battle she could fight with her fists or her royal position. This was a fight within herself, a battle for her identity. She had been raised to believe that Ilizania was the pinnacle of all civilizations, that her royal blood made her special. But now she understood that her bloodline was more complicated than she had ever known. Jerk was her father, a human. The thought echoed in her mind like a persistent drumbeat, and Jara struggled to make sense of it. She had seen Jerk as a warrior, someone who was strong and capable but still just a human, a creature she had always seen as beneath her. And yet, she was his daughter. The connection she had with him was undeniable, but it felt like a betrayal of everything she had been taught to value. She had never been close to Jerk. He was a stranger to her, someone she had only seen from a distance. But the more she thought about him, the more she realized that he had been an unknown part of her, a missing piece of her identity. She had been taught to look down on humans, to think of them as weak and inferior, but Jerk had shown her that they were capable of far more than she had given them credit for. He was strong, not in the way of Ilizanians, but in a different, quieter way. He fought not with power, but with heart, and that was something she had never truly understood. Jara's mind wandered back to their first encounter. She remembered how he had looked at her with those dark, intense eyes, eyes that had seen more of the world than she could ever imagine. He hadn't bowed to her, hadn't treated her as though she were superior. He had treated her as an equal, and that had infuriated her. She had thought that humans were beneath her, but Jerk had shattered that illusion. He had shown her that strength didn't come from bloodlines or royal status. It came from within. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was her mother. "Jara," the queen's voice was soft but firm, "it's time. You need to face the reality of who you are, of who you've always been. You cannot keep running from this." Jara turned toward the door, her heart heavy. She knew what her mother meant. It was time for her to confront the truth, not just about her father, but about herself. She couldn't keep hiding from the fact that her entire life had been based on lies, that her understanding of the world had been limited and narrow. But more than that, she couldn't keep denying who she was. She was part human, part Illyzanian, and that was a part of her that could never be erased. "I'm not ready," Jara said quietly, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Zara stepped into the room, her presence commanding yet gentle. She walked over to her daughter and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Jara, you are ready. You may not feel it yet, but you are. You have the strength of both your worlds within you. The human strength that comes from love, loyalty, and sacrifice, and the Illyzanian strength that comes from wisdom, honor, and power. You are the bridge between both worlds, and that is a gift, not a curse." Jara looked up at her mother, her eyes filled with doubt. "But how can I be both? How can I reconcile the two halves of me? I was raised to believe in one, and now everything is uncertain." Zara smiled softly, her eyes filled with a mix of pride and sadness. "You don't have to reconcile them, Jara. They are not opposites. They are two parts of a whole. You are both the Illyzanian princess and the daughter of Jerk. You can embrace both sides of yourself without losing who you are." Jara felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. "But what will they think of me? The Illyzanians. They will never accept me. They will see me as a weakness, as something less than what they expected." "They will see you as you are, Jara," the queen said, her voice steady. "They will see someone who has the courage to face the truth, the courage to embrace who she truly is. And if they do not see that, then they are not worthy of your leadership." Jara nodded slowly, a new determination beginning to form within her. It wasn't going to be easy. She had spent her entire life living up to the expectations of others, of being something that everyone else wanted her to be. But now, for the first time, she realized that she didn't have to be just one thing. She could be both Illyzanian and human, and she didn't need anyone's approval to be herself. The next day, Jara stood in front of the Illyzanian Council, the most powerful leaders of her people. They had gathered to discuss the future of the kingdom, but Jara knew that today, the future of her own identity would be decided. She was nervous, but she stood tall, her back straight and her head held high. She had to do this for herself and for her people. As she walked into the council hall, she could feel the eyes of the council members on her, their gazes sharp and judgmental. They had always respected her, but now she was different. She had shown a side of herself that they had never seen before. The weight of their expectations pressed down on her, but she didn't flinch. "My fellow council members," Jara began, her voice steady but firm, "I stand before you today as both a Illyzanian princess and the daughter of Jerk, a human warrior. I am both, and I will not hide from who I am." There was a murmur among the council members, and Jara could sense the tension in the room. Some of them looked shocked, others disapproving, but there were a few who looked at her with curiosity, perhaps even respect. She knew that her decision would not be easily accepted, but it didn't matter. She had already made up her mind. "I will not apologize for my heritage," she continued. "I will not apologize for the strength that comes from both worlds. I am both Illyzanian and human, and I will lead this kingdom with the wisdom of both. If you cannot accept that, then perhaps I am not the leader you want." The council fell silent. Jara held her breath, waiting for their response. And then one of the elder council members, a respected warrior named Velar, spoke. "Princess," he said, his voice low and gravelly, "you have shown great courage in facing the truth, and that is the mark of a true leader. We have been so focused on our bloodlines, on our past, that we have forgotten the true strength that comes from unity. Perhaps it is time for us to embrace both our past and our future." Jara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had been ready to fight, to prove herself. But now it seemed that the Illyzanians were willing to accept her for who she truly was. She didn't need their approval, but hearing Velar's words gave her hope that she could bridge the gap between her two worlds. And so, Jara made her decision. She would embrace both parts of her heritage, and she would lead her people not as a perfect Illyzanian princess, but as someone who had the strength to admit her flaws, to face the truth, and to build a new future for both humans and Illyzanians alike. She would be the leader they needed, a symbol of unity between two worlds that had always been divided.